FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
The real story of the Ukraine coup or uprising, revolution, depending upon your perspective, really the untold story, just got told by John Rubino at dollarcollapse.com. John, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Kerry. How are you?
All right. So you covered it. I mean, you nailed it. It's kind of like a test run for World War III, which doesn't really take place with a bunch of guns and nukes and cannons and aircraft carriers. It takes place on the cyber front, right?
Yeah, partially on the cyber front. This is really the first time that we've had a conflict where everybody involved is able to launch a cyber attack. That is, get into their opponents' networks and shut down power plants or poison water systems or turn off telecommunications networks or shut down banking systems. You know, all the things you can do once you have access to a major telecommunications system. And so far, they're doing some of it, but they're not going all the way. You know, Russia has cut a lot of telecommunications lines and shut down other things in the Ukraine, and the Ukraine is threatening to do the same with Russia. But they haven't really gone for it yet.
Well,
and so this is kind of a test run. You know, how far do you go when you're in an armed conflict in terms of adding the cyber war component to it? And they haven't done it yet, but they can. And it's completely possible that they ramp it up from here. So we'll get a kind of a sense of, first of all, what Russia's capabilities are in that regard. And second of all, what the effects of things like that are when your telecommunications grid goes down. How do you fight a war if you can't communicate with your soldiers in the field? And if your power plant goes off, what does that do to your warfighting ability or your ability to resist an invasion? So this is very new.
Well, you know, there's a couple of things they need to do in the U.S. to shut it down. It's really simple. Number one is hack Obama's teleprompters, okay? Because once those are gone, forget it. That's the end of the White House's capabilities to do anything. And number two is hack everybody's iPhones and Androids, because once we lose them, our ability to think has been totally undermined and diminished. You're gone. If you have no iPhone, no smartphone, that's probably 70% of the population that has now been effectively lobotomized. John, you realize that?
Yeah, I don't know how I would get anywhere if I had to actually read maps anymore. So I'm sure it's the same way for a lot of other people.
and music and books, and your life effectively would be ended. I mean, it would no longer be worth living, right? I mean, what would you do? And forget about making a phone call. Your kids would no longer be able to text. You might actually have to have meaningful conversation at the dinner table. And don't think the Chinese aren't thinking of this also. And man, the American family would never be the same.
Yeah. And you know, this is clearly a component of the military strategy of all the big powers now. And we really haven't seen it put into practice yet. So it's going to be very, very interesting when it does happen. If this is the time, then that's going to be the real story of this conflict. And if it's not this time, it's next time or the time after. But everybody's planning for it, and everybody's preparing and trying to gain some kind of an advantage behind the scenes with backdoors that let them get into their potential opponents' systems and just lurk there, ready to shut down that power plant or turn off that banking system or whatever. You know, it's a very new world in terms of military conflict. Then there's the financial aspect too, Kerry, where we're talking about imposing sanctions on Russia for intervening in the Ukrainian civil war, or whatever you want to call it. And they're talking about dumping their treasury bonds on the global market and crashing the dollar. So that's an angle that really hasn't shown up in past big power conflicts, and is suddenly on everybody's mind, because Russia probably doesn't own enough dollars to flat out crash the dollar's exchange rate. But if Russia and China acted together, they have a knife at our throats, financially speaking. They could cause havoc in the global financial system, and especially on Wall Street. So that's another consideration for us when we're out there blundering around the world, invading whoever we want and imposing sanctions on whoever we feel like bullying. And suddenly there are some weapons pointed back at us. And so that's going to moderate our behavior going forward, or it won't moderate our behavior and will trigger something like that and cause a global financial crisis. So again, another battlefield is opening up that is not tanks and planes, but that can be equally destructive.
I think it happened to Russia as well. You saw the ruble crash almost immediately, and you saw their stock market crash. And that very well, John, could have been engineered in the West on Wall Street with derivatives and with trading, because global markets, they're all tied together, and the signal could have gone out to the big banks, hey, take them down. And what would there really be to stop them from doing it, John?
Easily, yeah, they could easily do that. The global financial system is far bigger than any one, especially a developing country like Russia's central bank or financial system. So yeah, we could easily mess with their internal financial system with a single order going out to the big banks of the world. And so what they're talking about is responding in kind by messing with us, by dumping some of the dollars that they hold. And that's a very real threat to the U.S. because there is something like $15 trillion beyond our borders that doesn't show up in the U.S. money supply. But should those dollars come back home via a massive dollar dump by China or Russia or Brazil or some combination of those guys, and that would be just like a big increase in the domestic money supply. And it would be inflationary and destabilizing, and there's no real way to know what would happen, whether interest rates would spike or the dollar would tank or stocks would go up or down. We just wouldn't know what all that money would do because we've never had, $5 trillion or whatever just hit our system in such a short amount of time, as would happen if, say, China decided they wanted to get out of 1/3 of their foreign exchange holdings and a few other countries got on board. So, yeah, again, the world is becoming incredibly complex and incredibly interrelated. And we've created the conditions for new crises that we've never seen before. And they can be set off by relatively small events like the Ukraine, a country that most Americans couldn't find on a map. And those who could find it on a map have no reason to care about it. And yet, it's a dagger pointed at the heart of the global financial system now because we are so complex and we're so interrelated that a small problem can turn into a very big one in a big hurry now.
Yeah, that is pretty pathetic that most of you out there cannot find the Ukraine on a map.
I couldn't have before this.
I have to admit, I actually could find it, but it's just from years being a prisoner of the classroom, looking at the damn map of the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, and knowing where it is, and then Chernobyl, and these Ukrainians really haven't caught a break in hundreds of years. I mean, it just really, they've just been the peasants, and they've just been a beat up place, a beat up country. They looked like they were going to catch a break after the demise of the old USSR, the Soviet Union, but in point of fact, they really haven't. And they've just been kind of this satellite state of the Soviets. Now they've, the king is dead, long live the king. They've just got at least as bad a group running them, if not worse. And what can you do? It's just hell.
Yeah, the Soviet Union wasn't an aberration for Russia. They've always been an expansionist, authoritarian system, and they just call it by different names at different times. But Vladimir Putin is really no different, probably, from the point of view of his neighbors than Stalin was, because he's still trying to control them, and he still has the ability and the willingness to do so. So we're finding that out now. It took about 3 days for Russian troops to show up in the Ukraine and start dividing the country in half. And you could also, though, of course, make a case that Russia, like the U.S., wants to be able to control the borders or the states that surround it, because they don't want any unpleasant surprises, and they want access to the sea and all the rest, all the rest that goes with big power politics. So we shouldn't be surprised that they're exercising influence in the Ukraine. Yeah, and the goal now is to keep it from spinning out of control and turning into something that is much, much bigger than a dispute between some ethnic Russians in a country that's right next to Russia,
Yeah, well, there's also the contention that it was engineered by the West and the U.S. and us sticking our noses where they don't belong. And there's a recorded phone call in there between some State Department lackeys. But look, there definitely was some unrest there to start with. People were not happy with the way things are going, and they don't like being this Soviet satellite, neo-Soviet satellite, no question about that. So take your pick. But yeah, and there was corrupt leadership. You saw the pictures of the former leader's palace. So things were not all happy. It was not all Disney-esque there anyway. So what happens next? And, Eastern Europe was just like this buffer state historically, like Poland. Like Poland didn't exist. It wasn't a country. It was just a buffer state for the mongrel hordes attacking Western Europe. That was where they made their stand. So, complicated region. But nowadays, it looks like it's become this conflagration point between the U.S. and Russia. And I don't believe that Russia and China really love each other that much. I think that China wants to colonize Siberia because large portions of China are becoming uninhabitable and becoming desert-like. And, they like Siberia. It's got a lot of resources, and it's a potential for a safety valve to get a lot of Chinese out of China. And, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future there, because these two powers, it's kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They both hate the U.S., so that's what draws them together now. But will it keep them together throughout all time? That's what's going to be the interesting thing. So
yeah, we have definitely given a lot of other countries a reason to work together. We're uniting the world, but not in a way that we are going to find very favorable going forward, I think. But so Kerry, if this doesn't blow up on us, if the Ukraine turns out to be something that is like a 2-week story and then fades from the headlines, then I think the story becomes the European Central Bank, and how they really have no choice but to join the quantitative easing party here pretty soon. And I think that's going to be one of the defining events when they launch their bond buying program sometime in 2014.
You really think they're going to do it, huh?
I think they have to. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, one of the interesting stories that came out was that Rome was a few days from bankruptcy. Italy's largest city, vastly more important to them than New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago is to the U.S. And it's a few days from bankruptcy. You would think that would be a national crisis for Italy. But instead, Italian bond yields went down. Italy looked less and less risky as Rome got closer and closer to bankruptcy. And the reason for that is that a Roman bankruptcy would be a catalyzing event for the European Central Bank. They would have no choice then but to start a massive QE program. In other words, start pumping huge amounts of new money into the system to try to avoid a series of dominoes falling. If Italy fell into a financial crisis, and then that pushed Spain, and then that pushed France, you can't have that and still have the Eurozone hold together. So a crisis in one Eurozone country brings the European Central Bank that much closer to the time when it has to join the Bank of Japan and the U.S. Fed in monetizing most of the debt that's being created by the Eurozone member governments. And that's perceived as a good thing by the financial markets for now. And so that's why you saw Italian bonds actually improve when the Italian financial system was getting worse and worse and heading for a major default by its biggest city. And so
that's crazy.
And even if it's not, they did bail out Rome eventually, so it's not on the verge of bankruptcy anymore. But that's just one of 10 different black swans waiting to happen in Europe. Spain is a mess, Greece is a mess, France is falling into deflation right now, and the unemployment is so high in France by historical standards that a recession that makes unemployment go up, especially youth unemployment, would lead to gigantic street protests and general strikes, and the governments of Europe would just cave to something like that. So
what other choices have they got, right?
None.
Except to print money, right?
Well, or to let the Eurozone break up, which they see as a functional impossibility. The big European banks and all the other global banks are so intertwined now. Within Europe, they've lent so much money to all the different countries, which is all denominated in euros, that should that debt start to revert back to drachmas and lira and pesetas, it would cause chaos. And they can't let that happen. So they have no choice but to monetize as much debt as it takes to keep the system together. But they have been dragging their feet. They don't want to do it. But at some point in 2014, their hand is going to be forced, and they're going to have to do it. And added to the amount of money that's being pumped in the global financial system by the U.S. and Japan, that is just going to exacerbate the problems of the emerging markets and cause blowback to the. It's going to increase the amount of complexity and potential instability in the global financial system.
So gasoline to the fire, in other words, huh?
Yeah, and it brings the day that much closer when the whole thing unravels.
Yeah, well, but aren't you amazed, though, John, how long they've been able to kick the can down the road?
Yes, yeah, it shouldn't have been able to go on this long. And I think the reason that it has, well, there are two reasons. One is a printing press is a phenomenal tool for fooling people. It allows you to manipulate various markets and make those markets appear to be healthier than they really are. That's the U.S. stock market, and interest rates around the world are low. Low interest rates are generally a sign of health in a financial system, because that means people are willing to lend money for long periods of time on the assumption that they're going to get paid back. And the fact that most people left to their own devices would not lend money is kind of lost on the global financial markets, that it's governments doing it all now, doing the lending and the borrowing at the same time at artificially low rates, and pumping up equity markets in the meantime, and pumping up housing markets because of low mortgage rates. All of this stuff is artificial. It's all manipulated, but it all gives the appearance of financial health. And so as long as governments are armed with printing presses, they're able to delay the day of reckoning, but at a cost of more and more debt building up in the system, and more instability, and more difficulty in keeping it going. So at some point it blows up, but you can keep it going for a long time as long as you can manipulate, for instance, long-term treasury rates. If you can keep them low, everything else looks okay, and mortgage rates are low, and you can buy a house and you feel rich, and yada yada. But it's a strategy with a limited lifespan, although a fairly long lifespan apparently. But at some point, you build up so much debt that even central banks as powerful as the European Central Bank and the Fed and the Bank of Japan can't maintain the illusion of financial health. And then everything falls apart. But we just don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah, it so looked like it was coming so many times, and yet here we are, John. We're talking about it still. That's what gets me.
Yeah, and Kerry, what happens is, with almost all bubbles, this is the way it goes, is you get a few scares, and then they turn out to be false alarms, and the people who were raising the alarms are discredited, and they get more and more sheepish and more and
like
more
you and me.
Questioning. Yeah,
Well, we're not sheepish, though, right?
Yeah, but it's harder and harder to say this is the one. It's finally fallen apart, because it used to be easy back in 2007, 2008. It was easy for you and I to say, okay, this is the end of the world for the global financial system that depends on fiat currency and the whole money bubble thing. But it turned out not to be the end. They were able to pull us back from the brink and give us 5 more years of apparent normality. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm a lot more reluctant to talk about the final end of all of this. But what happens is you get the voices of doubt being stilled. And a lot of people who used to be bearish going bullish. And at that point, that's the point. You know, when almost nobody is bearish anymore, that's when the bubble finally bursts. Yep. And, you know, that's happening in the U.S. stock market. They do those bull-bear surveys. Sure. And bullishness in the U.S. stock market is at the highest level ever. Bearishness is heading for 0. Almost nobody says they expect U.S. stocks to be flat or down in the year ahead. Mm-hmm. And we've never had a point where it hits 0, but we're heading there, you know. And every time it gets this low in the past, it has signaled a major top in U.S. stock prices, which in turn, you know, when stocks tank, that makes everybody else more skittish, and you get you know, financial market effects across the bond market and the foreign exchange market, et cetera. And so based on history, we're headed for that time. And the question is it this week or 2 years from now? And there's no way to know that.
You know what it reminds me of with us, you know, talking about like the boy who cried wolf kind of thing, or Cassandra, you know, the sky is falling. Remember, was it Sanford and Son? And he's always saying that he's Fred Sanford. I'm having the big one. I'm coming to join you. You know, his wife. That's what it's like. It's the big one. It's the big one. We're coming to join you. And yet, you know, the big one never comes, you know?
Yeah. Eventually, Fred Sanford did die.
Yeah, he did.
So he had the big one sooner or later. But
yeah, after the show was canceled and in reruns. And I think we're going to be in reruns when the financial system has the big one, right?
Well, you know, a lot of people who shorted the U.S. stock market or went long gold and silver on...
Urgent alert. Ex-Secret Service agent claims it's worse than people know. One of Obama's former Secret Service agents recently smelled a rat. What he discovered inside our government was so devastating, he only saw one option. He quit. What's worse, he fears what he found could affect your job, your neighborhood, and most importantly, your family, very soon. It's worse than people know, he said in a recent interview, and I'm not trying to scare you either. We too share his concerns. This is why we've devoted the better part of 3 years collecting solutions for nearly all problems created by intrusive governments, and we've succeeded. Go to hiddensecrets1.info to check out all the details. Our panel of insiders have devised a legal but sneaky set of solutions to help you reclaim your privacy from the NSA, opt out of Obamacare, and make a bundle from little-known investments and small business opportunities. Simply visit hiddensecrets1.info. That's hidden secrets, the number 1.info.
Summer is almost over, and so far we've really lucked out. No hurricanes. And living in Florida here, I'm extremely grateful, but that could change tomorrow. And look, we're about to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Superstorm Hurricane Sandy. Do you remember that one? Not very many people in the Mid-Atlantic or the New York area region were prepared for it. But if you had PrepareWise emergency preparedness food, you were ready. If you'd prepared with PrepareWise water and the basics, some currency and a means of self-defense, you weren't caught off guard. And if you weren't prepared then, please learn from it and get prepared now with PrepareWise emergency preparedness food. It always pays to prepare. Go to preparewise.com, use the code Lutz. You'll get great savings. Depending on the size of your order, you're going to get a whole lot more. Be prepared. Don't be caught waiting for the government to come and save you. Preparewise.com, use the code Lutz, L-U-T-Z, be prepared.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.